Hey guys, welcome back to more Karen stories. In this video, there's a pretty ridiculous situation where a Karen kept patrolling my property, trying to get me arrested for so-called illegal farming operations. This person absolutely despised farmers, and honestly, someone needed to teach her a lesson. Let's dive into the story. The first one is titled, "I Got Revenge on Idiots That Parked on My Private Property." So here's what happened. I owned a business near a popular restaurant, and when their parking lot filled up, people would come park in mine. Normally, it wasn't a problem, especially since there was plenty of street parking. Plus, I actually lived on the property and often had friends over. If someone was taking up one of my few spots, my guests wouldn't have anywhere to park. Most of the time, I'd just give the restaurant a quick call and ask them to let whoever it was know they were parked in my lot. 9 times out of 10, someone would show up and move the car within a few minutes. But one day, I called and no one moved it. I called again and said, "Hey, can you have them move the car?" They told me they already informed the owner, who refused to move it and said I was more than welcome to call a tow truck. So I put on a southern accent and told them, "Well, all right then, Billy Bob's gonna bring the tractor down and take care of things," and hung up. Funny thing was, I actually had a bunch of heavy machinery parked nearby because we were in the middle of relocating some equipment. So I rearranged a few giant tractors around the car, making it completely impossible to move. A few hours later, the owners showed up at my door asking me to move the tractors. I told them I wouldn't, and that if they wanted to call a tow truck, they were more than welcome to. Of course, they couldn't do anything because there was no way any tow truck was moving those machines. Eventually, the police showed up, but they confirmed that what I was doing was perfectly legal and left. The people stayed in my parking lot for about an hour until they started offering me money to move the equipment. I made a quick $300 that night and sent a clear message to the restaurant, who now has signs up warning people not to park in my lot if theirs is full. I probably wouldn't have done anything under normal circumstances, but the fact that they told me I could call a tow truck showed me they knew they were in the wrong. And since it was private property, that would have cost me out of pocket. Total doofbags. Just a quick edit here. I lived in Kona, Hawaii, so laws are a bit different there. I started my business when I was 18 thanks to my dad giving me a few months free rent and a place to live. There were only a few parking stalls, most of which were taken up by his heavy equipment from his orchard. The car in question was a rental, which usually means tourists, and once you live there long enough, you learn how to spot them. A lot of people suggested I could have the car towed for free, but I've had to pay for removals before. Could I have set up a contract with a tow company to have the car removed at the owner's expense? Probably. But I rarely had issues, and it was a small business in a small town. Anyway, the first story came from r/bad on Tinder, which is a subreddit that features some of the best written comments on Reddit. It's interesting because these aren't traditional threads, they're just long-form stories written by people, and they tend to be unique and entertaining. Now let's move on to the title story. Karen constantly patrols my property to arrest me for illegal farming operations. So, I used to live on a small farm in Lancashire, England. After getting fired from a corporate job, I decided to start fresh and bought a few acres up north. At the time, land was much cheaper than it is today. I had an uncle in the farming business who taught me everything I needed to know about agriculture, including the specific laws in the area. He strongly warned me not to mess with agricultural regulations, so I didn't. I wasn't thrilled about some of the strict rules, but I trusted his experience. At first, I built a large vegetable garden and got a few chickens, thinking that would keep me self-sustainable until I was ready to expand. About 6 months after I settled in, a new neighbor moved in, and she caused quite a stir in our otherwise quiet community. That neighbor was Karen, and she was an absolute snob. From the very first conversation, she made that clear. She actually had the nerve to talk about the filthy and smelly farm around the corner without realizing she was talking to the owner. I thought maybe revealing it was my farm would embarrass her a little, but instead, it seemed to fuel her hate. She claimed all farms were unsightly and lowered property values. It was obvious from her appearance and attitude that she was a wealthy retiree who moved to the countryside for peace and quiet, though she picked a strange spot for someone who hated farms so much. Not wanting to write her off immediately, I asked why she chose to live next to farmland. Her reaction was shocking. She looked horrified, like I had run over her dog. She snapped, "How dare you tell me where I can or cannot live," and stormed off before I could explain myself. That's when the feud began. Not long after, I accidentally caught her bad-mouthing me to another neighbor. From what I overheard, her laundry had started smelling bad after being hung outside, and she blamed my farm. She gave me a cold stare as I passed by, then went right back to complaining. The next time I saw her, she was walking along my fence line. At first, I thought she was lost. She kept stopping and looking around. Then I noticed she was holding her phone out, and occasionally there were flashes. I thought maybe she was taking photos, but I brushed it off as paranoia. When I caught her doing it a fourth time, clearly snapping pictures on my side of the fence, I finally confronted her. She claimed she was just keeping an eye out for illegal activity in the area. When I asked why that involved me specifically, she dodged the question. Karen had convinced herself she was the neighborhood sheriff, and I was some crook waiting to be caught. Things escalated even further when I caught her literally trespassing, nearly entering my barn, camera phone in hand. She wasn't happy when I interrupted. Karen bluntly told me that if I didn't let her inspect the area, she was going to report me to the authorities for illegal farming. Obviously, I refused, as any sane person would. But that only seemed to make her more determined. She assumed that if I had nothing to hide, I'd have nothing to worry about. Hard to argue with logic like that, but I still didn't want this angry lunatic running wild on my property. So I asked her to leave. She did quietly. Or so I thought. Later that same day, I heard noises near my bins, and sure enough, Karen was rummaging through my garbage behind my back. That was the second time I caught her snooping around. I was starting to get really annoyed, but I still wanted to handle it like a reasonable neighbor. I grabbed the proper documentation showing I was operating legally, approved for health and hygiene standards, and tried to show her. Did she read it? Yes. Did she believe it? No. Every attempt I made to de-escalate the situation failed. Karen was convinced something was wrong, and she said she wouldn't stop until she found it. This time, I escorted her personally to the edge of the property, not letting her out of my sight. I told her to stay off my farm and stop trying to get me arrested or face real consequences. Not that I expected her to listen, but she deserved the warning. To be fair, I was being pretty nice, ignoring the trespassing, harassment, and illegal photography charges she was racking up. For a while, it seemed like she might have backed off a little. A week passed without any trouble. But then I started getting unexpected visits from local officials. First, a council worker came by about a noise complaint. Since I was a known figure in the area, we had a friendly chat, and he left without issue. The next day, I received a visit from an animal welfare officer following up on an anonymous tip about neglect and improper care of my chickens. Again, after a friendly conversation and a quick tour, they saw everything was fine and left. It was clear by then that Karen wasn't giving up. She was trying every angle she could think of to get me in trouble. But I wasn't going to let her ruin my peace, and I definitely wasn't going to let her win. After that inspection, things got quiet for a bit, but not for long. The third time was the only one that really made me nervous. A government agricultural inspector showed up unannounced to check if I was still following all the regulations properly. The inspection lasted 3 full hours, and during that entire time, I noticed Karen lurking by my fence line, watching the whole thing unfold like she was waiting for something dramatic to happen. Honestly, it was kind of amusing watching her try so hard to look important while the inspector just went about his job calmly and thoroughly. By the end of the tense morning, the inspector packed up and left without issuing any serious penalties or fines. He took up half my Saturday, but at least he didn't find anything wrong. As soon as he pulled away, Karen stomped back into her house, clearly furious that yet another one of her attempts to ruin me had failed so miserably. At this point, I assumed she must have run out of people to call because the visits from officials stopped almost as suddenly as they started. Still, I couldn't let myself relax too much, and I was right not to. A few days later, a neighbor came by showing me a strange flyer that had been posted around town. It read, "Drugs, decease, pollution. Samson's farm must be stopped. Join me and kick out this illegal farm." Signed by none other than Karen. If nothing else, Karen was tenacious. She'd failed to get the law on her side, so now she was turning to the public, trying to rally the neighbors against me instead. I knew the people around here were good, honest folks, so I wasn't worried about them falling for it. But I also couldn't risk giving her a chance to stir things up further. I started digging through the law books myself, determined to find something, anything, that could put an end to this once and for all. After hours of searching, I finally found my ace in the hole. Karen had previously complained about being woken up early by my chickens and often hung her laundry out to dry before sunrise. I remembered seeing her on a few occasions shaking out clothes and even the doormat across her lawn. And wouldn't you know it, according to the obscure UK Metropolitan Police Act of 1839, it's actually illegal to shake a rug, carpet, or mat outside before 8 a.m. I couldn't help but laugh at the delicious irony. Karen could be arrested for noise disturbance while my chickens were legally protected. Part of me wondered if stooping to her level was the right move, but I didn't have to think for long before picking up the phone. A few days later, I was fixing a gap in the fence when I saw Karen getting a surprise visit herself, and this time, it was unexpected for her. Within minutes of the stranger's arrival, Karen was already gesturing wildly and shouting at them. From where I stood, I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could imagine how it was going. Her aggressive outburst definitely didn't help her case. I'll admit, I might have stayed outside a little longer than necessary, watching the show unfold. It was the most fun I'd had in weeks. When it was over, Karen stormed straight toward me, clearly looking for someone to take her anger out on. I didn't feel like getting dragged into an argument, so I turned and walked away, hoping she'd take the hint. But Karen wasn't done. She kept coming, climbing the fence and chasing me all the way to my house. Despite my repeated attempts to calm her down, she only grew more aggressive, eventually trying to force her way inside. At that point, I had no choice but to call the police. When they arrived, the officers did their best to de-escalate the situation, but Karen was too worked up. They managed to remove her from the property and gave her a stern warning. Somehow, she avoided arrest by promising to stay away from me and my farm. The police were incredibly understanding, especially after hearing about the months of harassment and trespassing I'd endured. They even walked me through the process of applying for a restraining order, something I felt was absolutely necessary at that point. Before it was officially filed, I slipped a handwritten note through her letterbox letting her know what was coming, just so she wouldn't get any ideas about breaking her word. That evening, a few calls later, the restraining order was issued immediately. Now, Karen had to keep her distance or face real, serious consequences. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The news of the police involvement quickly spread through the neighborhood, and suddenly, everyone was talking about Karen. That was part of why I hesitated to involve the authorities. I knew it would draw attention in such a quiet area. But as people learned the truth about what had been going on, Karen's campaign against me started to backfire. All those propaganda flyers she'd been handing out were torn down and replaced with new ones, completely mocking and humiliating her for all the lies she'd told. Faced with mounting pressure and public shame, Karen had no choice but to publicly apologize. Otherwise, she risked becoming the target of the very mob she tried to create. I can only hope she learned a valuable lesson about minding her own business and keeping her nosy opinions to herself. From that point on, life on the farm returned to peaceful normalcy. And I'm happy to say I haven't had a single issue with her since. Let me leave you with this thought. Never mess with a farmer. You simply can't beat them. Back outside, I realized it was our neighbor Karen, and she hadn't even noticed me approaching until I gave her a not-so-subtle tap on the shoulder. She definitely hadn't been invited to the party, and she knew it just as well as I did. Still, that didn't stop her from making herself at home, even going so far as to sit in my new car. Karen jumped a bit when I tapped her, then turned to glare like I had snuck up on her on purpose. I tried to shift the mood by commenting on how nice the car looked. She agreed, rubbing her sweaty palms across the dashboard as she spoke. As more people started coming out of the house, she took that as her cue to leave. I locked the car soon after and went back inside to help clean up the leftover mess from the party. That's when my parents told me they were planning a week-long trip to visit my aunt a few states over, and they asked if I wanted to stay behind and watch the house. I said yes without hesitation. Why would I pass up a whole week of having the place to myself during the summer? The next morning, while I was tinkering with the car and my parents were packing their bags, someone interrupted me. I closed the hood, expecting it to be my mom, but instead, I found Karen standing there. To my surprise, she explained that she was actually the person who sold the car to my dad. And though he had officially sold it to her, she still seemed pretty attached to it. When I proudly told her that my dad had given it to me as a birthday present, she snapped, claiming she was still the rightful owner because the paperwork wasn't done properly or something like that. The conversation got awkward fast, and eventually, she excused herself. I went back into the house feeling a little uneasy. Maybe spending the week alone wasn't such a great idea after all. Later that day, my mom called to say they'd arrived safely. I mentioned Karen's visit, and they weren't happy. My dad explained that she had been forced to sell some of her belongings to pay off a court order, but he warned me not to bring it up again, since it made her really angry. I played it off so they wouldn't feel like they needed to cut their trip short. Then I settled in for what I hoped would be a peaceful few days. But peace was hard to come by. The next morning, I woke up groggy after barely any sleep, thanks to someone speeding around the block late into the night. I pulled open the curtains, yawning, only to freeze when I saw my driveway was empty. Panic set in instantly. I ran outside, heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. My Shelby Daytona sitting on Karen's driveway. As I got closer, I noticed fresh tire marks leading up to the car. The keys were still in the ignition. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Karen had been the one tearing around the neighborhood last night in my car. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and drove it straight back home, with Karen trailing closely behind, clearly not expecting me to take it back so quickly. She started shouting the moment I parked, but when she saw how angry I was, she switched tactics, suddenly speaking in a softer, more defensive tone. She claimed she found the keys in the car and moved it to keep it safe. I scoffed at that, asking if she also took it for a spin. She denied it immediately, but couldn't quite meet my eyes. After that, I ignored her pleas and went inside. I didn't trust her at all, and sure enough, the footage from my door cam later confirmed everything. 2 blissfully quiet days passed before I saw her again, this time, by chance, while I was grabbing a snack from the fridge. And once again, there she was, trying to open the car door with a suspicious head tilt that looked straight out of a cartoon about clumsy thieves. I ran outside just in time to catch her before she could climb in. She darted back to the curb, then turned to face me, this time with a darker mood than before. Even though I was the only one with any real reason to be angry, Karen managed to twist things around again, claiming I was the one harassing her, the harmless, nice old lady. I brought up the joyride again, and she denied it once more, no apology, just denial. But she definitely soured when I mentioned the video footage I had. Karen demanded I hand over the tapes, saying I was illegally recording her. Of course, the camera only pointed toward my own driveway, which meant I wasn't doing anything wrong. When I refused, she threatened to call the cops. Fine by me. I had nothing to hide. When she called them, She insisted I wasn't allowed to leave, like I was going to run away or something. At that point, I was seriously starting to question her mental state. No wonder people had warned me about getting into it with her. Half an hour of tense silence and menacing stares later, 2 officers finally showed up. Without so much as a greeting, Karen launched into a dramatic retelling of the events. I calmly told my side, but all that did was spark a shouting match where nobody could understand each other. At one point, Karen scoffed at me for being too young to own a car like mine, and honestly, the officer almost bought it. One of them followed me into the house while the other kept Karen busy. I showed him my ID, birth certificate, and driver's license, and once I had the chance to explain things calmly, I also showed him the footage of Karen stealing the car. He seemed satisfied. Outside, the officers compared notes as Karen glared at me smugly. They dismissed the issue when they saw I could prove ownership, which made Karen furious. Before they left, I told them I wanted to press charges. Both officers agreed we should go down to the station to answer questions. That's when Karen completely lost it. She called me every name in the book, screaming in my face until one of the officers tried to step in, and that's when she lashed out, smashing the car's wing mirror before attempting to storm off. The cops stopped her, shoved her into the back of the patrol car, and hauled her away kicking and screaming like a wild animal. Eventually, Karen pleaded innocent until the footage came up in court. Then she admitted everything. In the end, she ended up going to jail, which I think was more than deserved. I also got a restraining order against her, so she'll never get near my car again. Before we wrap up today, let's check out another story from r/malicious compliance. You're definitely going to want to hear this one. It's titled, "Boss asked me to wash work linen at home, so I did." So here's what happened. The person worked at a therapy clinic for a short time. They used towels and pillowcases regularly for exercises and ice pack applications. After moving to a new location that didn't have a washer or dryer, the director decided employees would just take the linens home and wash them themselves. Most coworkers just accepted it as part of the job, but this person didn't agree. They were hourly workers, and washing linens was clearly a work-related task. When it was their turn to take the linens home, they clocked in on their phone before starting the washer and didn't clock out until they had washed, dried, and folded everything. A week later, their manager texted them asking about the extra hours. Their reply? "Well, I was on the clock washing the linen." Not long after that, the clinic hired a contractor to handle the linens weekly. One commenter pointed out that this probably violated several health codes, since medical linens are considered biohazard materials and require industrial cleaning methods. Either way, major win for standing up to a lazy boss.